So thank you for being with us today. Thank you for participating in this Center for Spiritual Living Tucson. I know you have choices in our world of mixed, hybrid, virtual, and everything else. So I'm glad you decided to be with us today. Today, we continue our exploration and our experience of the light of the divine that shines in, around, and through each of us. And it's, of course, stuff happens, right? It's just how it is in the world. And one of the things that's intriguing to me is we get to have the experience of what we think. And so Maria and I were trading emails this morning, and she'd freaked herself out. And so now she's working without a camera. It's like, you get what you're thinking. I had the same conversation with my dad a couple of hours ago now this morning, because he was freaking himself out. And so he was having freaked out experiences. And he said, and this was huge, he said, I guess if I quit worrying so much, things won't be so bad. Because each one of us has the opportunity to pay attention to our lives and remember that what we see on the outside is just a reflection of the light that's in us. And it's a wonderful feedback loop. And it's part of what makes this teaching so wonderful and so horrible, because it shows us in front of our face what's going on in our heads. And so that impacts the way we experience the light in us. And when we notice it and when we see it that way, and we're able to look at it and say, oh, my thinking is confused. If I straighten out my thinking, then what happens to me will straighten out too. And that is how it works. So we always have the opportunity to affect the world in front of our eyes by changing the way we think on the inside. And that's part of how the divine shows up. The light of the divine shows up as us. It's just how it goes. It's not a penalty. It's not a punishment. It's just part of the thing called reality. So anyway, here we are staring at midwinter. The shortest day is Tuesday. Officially, winter solstice occurs Tuesday morning at almost 9 o'clock our time. And that's the tipping point when the days begin to lengthen again. Those of us that live in the desert aren't exactly thrilled that we're heading towards more sun, but other parts of the world where it's cold and dark and miserable, yeah, they're happy that the sun is returning. And midwinter has been marked usually by bonfires for longer than there has been recorded history. And now it's just kind of a cool thing, right? Because in our technological world, it's not so critical. But once upon a time, back in history, humans on the planet recognized that the days were getting shorter and darker and colder, and they were afraid the sun wasn't going to come back. And they knew that the absence of light meant they were going to be in trouble. And so they couldn't grow crops and they couldn't find food to eat. And it was a bad deal. They couldn't even go find grains because the grains wouldn't grow in the darkness and the cold. And so they did the bonfires to say, hey, sun, come back. We like you. We really think you're important. And they called the light back. So this is ancient history, right? We know better now, right? Because we're all so smart and stuff. But it's still embedded in our consciousness, this ritual and this practice of recognizing the light, recognizing the darkness, being able to see how we bring this light that's in ourselves back out and shine it. And there's something to this, right? Even if we logically know better. I mean, think about all the people that brave the traffic and the crowds to go to Winter Haven here in Tucson to look at all the houses all lit up. Think of the practices of candles on window ledges, or lights on the porch, or lights on the tree, or whatever it is, however you bring light into your life this season of the year. And in places where it's colder than Tucson, and maybe even here, if you're lucky, there's a practice of burning the Yule Log. This started way back when as a pagan holiday, maybe the Vikings, maybe somebody else, but it was calling the sun back. And it became part of the Christian tradition too. And they shifted it and started honoring the 12 days of Christmas, starting on Christmas Day and running until Epiphany, January 6th. The first celebrations, they would actually drag a tree in and stick the trunk of the tree in the fireplace. And they would keep moving that tree trunk in, and hopefully they would have enough fire to last until January 6th. So what's all this focus on an external light source? It's so very easy to forget that the light of the presence lives in us and through us. And the only light we can experience outside of us is actually a reflection of the light that's in us. And every single Sunday in December, we recognize this one light that fuels all different faith traditions and all belief systems, and everyone who practices them. Last night, 11 of us gathered at Unity's Labyrinth to share an experience of light together as a community. And then Monday night, we're going to have our Zoom solstice and candlelighting service, and David's going to help us with some seasonal carols, holiday carols. And we will once again remind ourselves of our shared and reflected light. And if you want the lyrics and the word sheet, it's in the newsletter. So we keep pointing back to this newsletter because it's our way of communicating with each other. Anyway, so Dr. Ernest Holmes in the Science of Mind text wrote on page 411, paragraph 4, by giving our complete attention to any one idea, we automatically embody it. We attract to ourselves the objective likeness of this embodiment. The thought becomes the thing. The mental state takes on the form, color, and temporary reality. We outwardly experience our state of consciousness. But since the apparent without, what we see, is merely a reflection of the within, which is cause, what we most need to do is start with the simple proposition of the creative power of thought. And from this inner recognition, know that circumstances are formed and held in place. Easier said than done, right? That's why it's a constant and perpetual practice for each of us. That's been the power behind the daily morning practice, which has continued steadily without missing a lick since March of 2020, 640 days. We remind ourselves when we surround ourselves with others who help us remember the beliefs that we choose to hold and to practice to live by. Motivational speaker Jim Rohn is credited with first talking about this idea, and I didn't really like it at first, and I think he's probably right, that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So if you want to change your life experience, one way to do it on the outside is to change the people you hang out with. How do you do that? By deciding who those people are that up-level you. And by choosing to live with people who up-level you, then you up-level yourself. But the beginning is always the decision. And daily morning practice, group practice, is one of the ways of moving that law of averages in the direction of remembering the divine essence that lives in each one of us. And so it's also worthwhile, if you think about your 5 people you spend the most time with, if you're always the one who's inspirational, you might want to notice that. You might want to think about that. You might want to decide to change the way you choose to engage with the world, unless you want to be that one that is pulling and a well that's empty can't share. So we each get to decide and consider how we feed ourselves and how we choose to engage with our world. And this is part of the constant practice. We have to remember that our own well-being and the well-being of those around us is contingent on what each one of us chooses to do with our lives. This is also the power of 12-step groups and any group like that, which help the participants keep focused on where they choose to be, who they wish to become, how they choose to live, how they choose to be in the world. So how do we remember that we are the light? Some people really are strong enough to remember by themselves that they are individually self-sufficient without ever leaning on anybody else. That's not true for most of us humans. Most of us benefit from interacting with like-minded folks because it's easy to forget that each one of us is the emanation of the divine, is our own light. And together we can encourage each other to shine more brightly. That's the benefit of being in community, whatever community looks like for you. For many of us, we're not only part of one community, but we're actually part of several. And in this interconnected world that we live in, that we all have access to, and because of the pandemic, we're getting to explore even more broadly. We get to see all of these interconnected ways that we get to share our light. So this week, I'm reading from a very old but new to me collection of science fiction stories by a master storyteller, Clifford Simak. The short stories in this particular book, City, were first published in 1944, almost 80 years ago. In the one that I read last night, called The Huddling Place, the main character, a dude named Webster, had retired to his country estate, just like everyone else had, because cities were no longer necessary. Everyone could live wherever they wanted and work from home, and there wasn't really a physical need to go anywhere. Does this sound familiar? He wrote this in 1944. And when they wanted to connect with anybody or any place, they got to their screen and they spun the dials on the machine in their home and they could link up. And it was almost as good as being there. It was probably a little more like virtual reality than our present experience on Zoom, because even the chair that Webster sat in seemed to be part of the scene that he was projecting himself into. And in the story, Webster discovered that he had become afraid of being away from home. He'd become agoraphobic in the 30 years since he had been cloistered at home. 30 years, can you imagine? Because it's a science fiction story, something bad happened because he was too afraid to actually leave home. I don't think any of us have been that cloistered in our own homes in the past 21 months. And it feels like it sometimes, right? Webster forgot that he contained within himself this light worthy of sharing, and allowed his fear to get in the way of his ability to share it. And it had knock-on effects in his world. And we can do this too, by dimming our light, by not sharing what we have to share in whatever way makes sense to us. We can do it by deciding we don't have anything of value to offer. In yesterday's daily reading from 365 Days of Richer Living by Raymond, Charles Barker, and Ernest Holmes, the guys, Barker and Holmes, reminded us, God's eternal harmony and order are mine, and I let them express through me. My family, friends, and co-workers sense this and are healed by it. Peace flows out from me, healing everyone I contact. It is a subtle, soothing balm to all their fears and doubts. They feel better for having spoken to me or clasped my hand. Every room I enter is alive with divine harmony and order. God's presence is made alive by the truth I know and the love I emanate. Power flows to the weak. Positive conclusions flow to the uncertain. And God's omnipotence is made visible. The whole Spirit of God in everyone is quickened into right action. This is the light that lives in each of us, that divine light, that whole and holy presence that lives in each of us. And we have the opportunity to remember and notice and shine that light at every moment in every interaction. So I want to close with two pieces, one from poet John Roedel, who was with us last week, and then one from Ernest Holmes. First from John. Me, hey God. God, hello. Me, I'm falling apart. Can you put me back together? God, I'd rather not. Me, why? God, because you're not a puzzle. Me, but what about all the pieces of my life that are falling down onto the ground? God, let them stay there a while. They fell off for a reason. Take some time and decide if you need any of those pieces back. Me, you don't understand. I'm breaking down. God, no, you don't understand. You're breaking through. What you're feeling are just growing pains. You're shedding the things and the people in your life that are holding you back. You're not falling apart. You're falling into place. Relax. Take some deep breaths. Allow the things you don't need anymore to fall off you. Quit holding on to those pieces that don't fit anymore. Let them fall off. Let them go. Me. But once I start doing that, what will be left of me? God, only the very best pieces of you. Me, and this is the truth of it, I'm scared of changing. God, I keep telling you, you're not changing, you're becoming. Me, becoming who? God, becoming what I created you to be. A person of light and love and charity and hope and courage and joy and mercy and grace and compassion. I made you for more than the shallow pieces you have decided to adorn yourself with, that you cling to with such greed and fear. Let all those things fall off you. I love you. Don't change. Become. Become. Become who I made you to be. I'm going to keep telling you this until you remember it. Me, there goes another piece. God, yep, let it be. Me, so I'm not broken? God, of course not. But you're breaking like the dawn. It's a new day. Become. And then from Dr. Holmes, Science of Mind, page 565. The spirit with me is God. That spirit is perfect. Because that spirit is perfect, my knowledge of that spirit destroys every doubt, every fear, casts out all uncertainty and all unbelief. and fills me with the knowledge of my own perfection. That is that within me which is divine, perfect, happy, whole, and harmonious. There is that within me that has never been afraid, never been limited. It is this Christ nature within me that I now recognize and speak into manifestation through my being. The spirit within me, which is perfect, shall remove every consciousness of disease, shall stimulate activity and recognize perfect circulation of divine ideas, and establish within me the knowledge of the divine pattern of perfection, which I already am. So here we are. We've got the challenge. Do we see ourselves as divine? Do we see ourselves as God sees us, as our light of being, or as something less than, something smaller, something broken, busted, limited, whatever? Or do we see our own light? We get to decide. We get to enact that. Figure out what that is for you and do that. Bless yourself and bless us all. Thank you. So now I'm going to roll into the prayer, this affirmative prayer. So if you can imagine letting pieces of confusion drop away, letting pieces of doubt drop away, fall off, letting anxiety go, and stepping up into the light of your own being, that essence of the divine that you already are. Hold that thought while I speak these words. I recognize that one light, that one life of God. And I know that that light lives as me and lives as each beloved here. We each one already have that divine light within ourselves and have the option, have the opportunity to radiate that divine presence into the world. And as we do that, we experience it, and so does everyone else we run into. So I remember and know and reflect on my own experience and expression of divinity. And I know that when I see things that don't look so divine in front of my eyes, I get to take my own blinders off. I get to see this world with God eyes and see the light that lives in me and lives as each one. So I take this opportunity to remember and know. And I know that each one, including me, already lives as God, already lives as that divine expression, already lives as the light of goodness and joy and harmony and peace and great love. So I relax into this truth, and I know nothing has to be changed. I get to become, and so does everyone else. We each get to become a greater expression of this light that lives in us and through each one. And I know the truth of those words, and I let them be, and so it is.